So the PowerPoint is here.
Yeah, Catholic.
Thank you. Very happy to have you here.
I'm very happy to be here, Catholic. Oh, Dublin. Rapprochez-vous un peu. Rapprochez-vous.
May I introduce myself? I'm Dariusz Struczewski, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities.
Oh, enchanté de vous connaître.
So extremely pleased to welcome you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be in another Polish friendship community.
It's great to have you here. Let me introduce myself. I'm Grzegorz Maziarczyk, the Director of Institute of Literary Studies.
Wow.
A narratologist who was brought up on your narratology, so it's an honor to meet
You were brought up when you were 2 years old, and you raised.
Yeah, but then I kind of followed your footsteps by becoming transmedial and work and image, music and work. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Is it possible to say to people to come a little forward?
We'll make them to come.
Zobaczmy teraz, jak on się nam tutaj prezentuje. O, jeszcze nie weszło, dobra, tak? Aż tak? Jezus Maria. Bardzo. Może tu trochę okazić. W porządku? Na pewno? Nie, ja sobie zaraz to zawidę, bo nóżkami trzeba. Nóżkami. Chyba nóżkami trzeba.
Hallo.
Weet je nog wie ik ben? We hebben elkaar in Wrocław ontmoet.
We hebben elkaar ontmoet, ja, dat weet ik.
In
Ja.
Wrocław heb
Was
ik een
in
tentoonstelling geopend van de ambassade bij
Oh,
Nederland.
dat was dat. Oké. Jij bent
Może on jest źle założony, słuchajcie, jakiś z tym. A może krzywo założony jest. A może ale co jest dobrze? Trzymajcie, dobra, ja to wszystko.
Is it possible to ask people to come a little forward? The people who sit in the
Even
back?
more, yes, I did it already, but I can do it
To
again.
jednak działa.
Okay, please
Okej.
do it.
Proszę Państwa, bardzo prosimy o zejście niżej.
I want you
Bardzo
to-
prosimy, wszystkich tam z końca. Prosimy Państwa. To jest prośba pani profesor, nie moja.
Yes, that's true. I do because it is true. Yes.
This one. You're going to speak to this one, yeah?
I like this because then I don't need to hold it. And you can hear it, right?
teraz chce Pani włączyć?
Nie będzie wyłączony, tylko że dobrze. Dobra, dobrze. Potem zobaczymy, może nie wiem, do pytań potem jakoś z sali, to sobie tam wykorzystamy.
Proszę użyć.
No, it's much nicer
You
when
want
they
me
are
to
little.
pour some water in a cup?
Oh, I can do that.
Okay.
I can do that when I.
This one is gas and this
This is with.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to invite you at the beginning of incredible and important week, the week that we can welcome at our university the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin, Professor Mieke Bal from Netherlands. Dear Professor, I would like to warmly and kindly welcome you here in Lublin. I hope that your stay will be fruitful, not only for us, researchers, doctorals and students at the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin, but also for you. And that you will have opportunity to see Lublin city, our university, and maybe some other villages and cities in our region. I hope that we will get time to see them. Dear friends, I would like to welcome at our meeting Dean of the Faculty of Humanities of our university, Professor Dariusz Skurczewski. It is a pleasure to welcome Director of the Cool Doctoral School, Professor Marcin Składanowski. And I would also like to remind you that our meeting is a part of Doctoral Days, which are organized at our university nowadays. I would like to welcome Director of the Institute of Literature Studies, Professor Grzegorz Maziarczyk, and co-organizer of this event, President of the Scientific Association of Doctoral Students, Magister Kamila Oleszczuk-Kasperek. And dear friends, I think that we are going in time, so I would like to ask our Dean for official welcome our guest here at university.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Faculty of Humanities, John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin. It's truly wonderful to see so many students, professors, and distinguished guests gathered here today. And let's be honest, meeting at 5 p.m. in an auditorium like this usually means one of two things. Either something momentous is about to happen, or we have all mistaken it for a party. Since I don't see any wine and cheese, though, I think we are in the right place. Before we reach the highlight of the afternoon, I would like to start with some well-deserved thanks. This event didn't come together by magic, and we owe much to our organizers. Dr. Andrzej Gładysz, Director of the Institute of Arts, Dr. Ela Błotnicka-Mazur, Professor Małgorzata Gamrat, whose vision and initiative gave us the Meet the Master series of lectures, a series that reaches its fortunate consummation today. A big round of applause is also due to our dedicated PhD students, Kamila Oleszczuk-Kasperek, President, Sandra Imko, Vice President, and Aleksandra Witkowska, Secretary of the Board of the Doctoral Research Group. Without their efforts, we might still be debating whether to meet here or in a coffee shop. Let's give them all a warm round of applause. Thank you very much. I must also acknowledge that today's lecture and our guest's visit have been made possible thanks to funding from the Initiative for Excellence Research University program, supported by the Ministry of Higher Education and Science. This support has allowed us to bring exceptional scholarship to Lublin, and we are deeply grateful. Now, there's one person here who deserves special recognition, someone who hardly needs an introduction, yet I will attempt one anyway. Scholars who deliver talks tend to fall into two categories. Those who need a lengthy preamble to highlight their work, and those whose names already grace syllabi worldwide, requiring no such build-up. Our guest today, Professor Mieke Bal, firmly belongs to the second. But I would like to propose a third, rarer category: scholars who, despite their towering achievements, don't retreat to the ivory tower. Instead, they engaged with the world, breathing life into knowledge through art, performance, and social connection. It is an honor to welcome Professor Mieke Bal, cultural theorist, former professor of theory of literature at the University of Amsterdam, and Academy Professor of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences. Many of us have delved into her works like narratology and traveling concepts, but her scope spans centuries, from biblical antiquity to contemporary art. Beyond her 7 honorary doctorates and international renown, she's a video artist, filmmaker, performer, and curator. During her week with us, we might even catch a glimpse of these artistic pursuits firsthand. Professor Bal, thank you for making time in your undoubtedly packed schedule to join us in Lublin, a city where for centuries East have met West and North has met South. Above all, thank you for spending a full week with us, especially with our PhD students, who will shape the future of the humanities. You will officially open our Doctoral Days with your lecture titled Art of Sadness. And now, without any further ado, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here and for your interest in the work. And I will say more when we open the exhibition and the whole week later. But I have to say that my very special relationship with Poland is amazingly intense. And I have so many friends, and every time there are new ones coming in, like today. And the people in Lublin, I've never been in Lublin, and here I am. And it's another area of friendship, intellectual friendship, artistic friendship. Thank you so much. So I'll just give the lecture, and then, of course, you're always welcome to take me and question. Okay, so I'm going to, let's see, this one is not coming up. I want to start with the scene, and right, that's the one, Art of Sadness. So the scene titled Narrative Stuttering, this is one of the scenes in the exhibition from the 2019 video installation Don Quixote, Sad Countenances, shows Don Quixote alone on a dark theatrical stage. For most of the 8 minutes episode, all the episodes are 8 minutes except the last one is 16, but for the 8 minutes episode, Sancho Panza is sitting on a chair on the side, holding the script, helping him when needed as a prompter. So this is a moment of theatricality. The knight is trying desperately to tell his story, the adventures, his opinions, whatever happened to him and those around him. But he is unable to act effectively as a narrator. And at the end, he bursts into tears, as you can see in the next slide. Sancho is holding him in order to comfort him, demonstrating by physical touch that he is not entirely alone. And this physicality is a primary point this ending of the episode is to make. But there is much more happening here. And all of that participates in the artwork, its effectivity as affective, and its status as an imaginative presentation of a very sad story. Now, first, these two figures can do what they do because they have a space in which to do it. And that space is a stage, hence a fictional and visual one. Is the sound okay? Yes? Okay. The darkness of the stage that you see around him, the darkness deprives the space of perspectival depth, at times making Don Quixote almost seem floating. Now, yeah, it's good. It's there. Here he is again. The stage isolates him. At the same time, gives him an audience. In line with this brief description, I consider the theatrical setting as a material theoretical fiction. This is an important term in my work, a theoretical fiction. It is material and it's built as a theater, and once the figures are acting in it, it's a fiction. One that helps our thinking about, in this case, the social issue of empathy. Now, Freud, you know who that is, right? Freud came up with this term, theoretical fiction, to justify his fanciful story in his 1913 book, Totem and Taboo, of the sons who kill and eat their tyrannical father. A fiction indeed. But elaborating that story led him to, and then helped him with, the discovery and elaboration of what became known as the Oedipus complex, a theoretical advance in his thinking. Now, from 2008 on, Michel Williams-Gamaker, you see here at the left and there at the right, and I have deployed that notion in a variety of films and video installations. And each time we kept balancing the two sides, reflecting on how the fictions created by others helped a theoretical idea to make itself both concrete and elaborated. Now, this Freudian theoretical fiction is one genre of what I call image thinking. And that is a term that I have used as a title for a book in 2022. And Freud's theoretical fiction of image thinking is narrative. But others can be visually compelling, cinematic, or poetic, such as some concept metaphors. In a sense, Freud's is the exemplary one, where the theoretical result is primary. Now, in the scene from Don Quixote, Sad Countenances, the stage which is, with its black floor suggests the potential of a theater to be affectively effective. That is the theoretical question. The stage proposes a fictional space in which viewers can engage themselves, imaginatively going along with the fiction presented. In this sense, the stage explores how theatricality can help to enable the narratively disabled, which is the case of the traumatized, such as Don Quixote. But what is and how can we consider theatricality? Which, in turn, in epistemological doubt, raises the question of a definition, if a definition is what is primarily needed to grasp what theatricality is and does. Theater scholar Katie Rutger, you see here, considers theatricality, quote, a specific mode of perception, a central figure of representation, and an analytic model of crisis of representation that can be traced back to the changes in the material basis of linguistic behavior, cultures of perception and modes of thinking, end of quote. Now, this multi-tentacled description gives theatricality many functions and foregrounds its participation in thinking as well as in its inherent intermediality. And I know a lot of people say transmediality. I don't, for reasons that will become clear, but intermediality. Now, theater and performance scholar Mieke Bal, here on the right, gives theatricality the critical edge that the exhibition of which narrative stuttering is an episode, the little one that I started with, seeks to achieve what she calls a critical vision machine. What Sancho is doing physically on the material stage is what audience members are called upon to do, albeit without physical touching. Such a call stems from the need of the narratively incapacitated figure in his theatrical setting, and by extension, the likes of him in real life, for an empathetic audience. That's what people need. If this call succeeds, the viewers can no longer be considered an audience with the connotations of passivity, receptivity, and unification that the word suggests, but become participants. Materiality, intermediality, and participation. These three elements already go to show that image thinking, this is my key term, image thinking, exceeds the limited view of fiction that has misled critics so frequently into judgmental rejections of fiction as unreal, irrelevant, and escapist. Oh, fiction, that's just, like fairy tales. Now, it also exceeds a limited view of images, that core of image thinking, as visual, as only visual, and as more predominant today than in the past. This is another cliché that we have around us. For this reason, when doing the filming of Narrative Stuttering, that scene with which I began, it turned out that there was an audience in the theater getting a guided tour, this was just by chance, a guided tour of the building. So they made noise. And we decided not to accept the offer from the theater director to ask them to leave or to postpone the shooting until they would have left. They were simply asked to keep their voices a little bit down. The near silent presence is sometimes audible, and that is important. The slight murmur that signifies the presence of humans adds to the material presence of the process of thinking that the stage embodies. And this was a serendipitous event that we had not foreseen, one of those accidental events frequently occurring during filmmaking. Filmmaking is a series of accidents, and that makes it an adventure. These are the practical material events that contribute to the image thinking, because it is a practical process, mostly collectively performed. And the occurrence of such events forces filmmakers to think on their feet and decide right away if and how the incident can contribute to the thoughts that result, the thought images that the works end up producing. And that was the immediate thoughts that I had. Don't send them away. Now, inviting an empathetic audience is a primary goal of this exhibition, in which trauma is a specific problematic we aim to work on and through, a working that involves thinking in the sense of creating something new, socially helpful, through being artistically meaningful. And for this emergence of empathy to be possible, a form of display is required that changes from the traditional museal display, which keeps audiences at bay, a distance often materialized by bars, cords, signs, and enforced by guards. Do not touch. Now, there is an important temporal aspect to this, which participates in the materiality of image thinking. For this traditionally imposed mode of viewing governs the temporality of looking. In the theater, by contrast, people can sit, and the display is nearby and accessible. And visiting can consist of quietly sitting. The museum becomes a kind of theater in this material sense. And this situation of the museum as theater is what makes art contemporary, for it compels spectators, visitors, participants, whatever you want to call them, to make the work, to make it work. The liveness of theater produces contemporaneity. The Don Quixote exhibition as a whole seeks to produce such material comfort for facilitating affective attachment in visitors, turning them into participants. The consequence is a radically different temporality of the art experience. Now, I'm not sure if I already showed this. No, yeah, there they are. Okay. Time. Time, thus, turns out to be a factor of affect. In conjunction with the academic semiotic understanding of theatricality, of Katie Redke, that you've seen before, and the academic political understanding of criticality of Mieke Bal, the other one in that earlier slide, this physical element of comfort and time is, I argue, intellectual, political, and artistic all at once. I contend that seating, and this is something that seems like a silly little materiality, but it's for me an absolute requirement. Seating, benches or chairs, participate in the image thinking endeavor and become material thought images, just as did the dark stage and the slight murmuring in the background in that earlier scene. For time and its duration are the backbones of aesthetic experience. And this had become clear in my earlier, when I was designing and curating an exhibition for the Munch Museum in Oslo in 2016 and 17. And here you see some images of that. The fiction, taking the form of a story through the concreteness, suggests a solution to theoretical questions. Once these are opened up, it becomes possible to develop theory through imaging. Imaging is an important word that I put in. What fiction enables us to imagine. So imaging and imagining are not the same thing, but they are connected. And that image is the figuration of the idea. I was looking for a term that will be more process-based than result-oriented, reciprocal between the two as well as between the two activities, and one that is not entangled with what are in fact loathsome considerations. Now, Kamini Velodi warns us in her critique of the concept of artistic research. I'm sure you know that concept and use it, but she's very critical of it. Although it has led to a host of intellectual debates and inquiry, it is difficult to deny that a major impetus of artistic research has been economic, policy-driven, and managerial. With these words, she invokes the curse that is destroying higher education worldwide as we speak. You know what I'm talking about. She delves deep into philosophy, conceptions of thinking, the differentiation between ontology and epistemology. The dangers Velodi notices are many. A primary one being the imposition of an obligation of doing research imposed on art making, and also a simplified view of thought. Both art and thought are thus being damaged. And when thinking is subjected to methods, it becomes reproductive. In Velodi's Deleuzian view, she's a very Deleuzian thinker, thought instead ought to be the production of the new. And this thinking is congenial to art making. This affiliation between art and thinking on the condition her analysis implies that both stay away from the reproductive, repetitive implications of the preposition re in the noun research, is where I hope to comment on my own experiments so that they can suggest pathways to novelty. And the difficulty underlying the Don Quixote project is eminently suitable for further probing of the alternative concept of image thinking. And the challenge was quite specific in its troubled relationship between content and form, and between the narrative and visual aspects involved. The point was to make connections between artistic and social issues and to improve our understanding of how these two domains can go together in the present, with the collaboration of the past in what we call cultural heritage. Here, Cervantes' novel. Now, a heritage is something entrusted on us with the command to do something with it now. This stimulates a renewed activity, a novel existence in the present. And through this literary work, worldwide known best-selling masterpiece, I sought to foreground the importance of the past for the present. The image thinking happened at the crossroads between reading and imaging. On my reading, the predominant issue that rules The novel's aesthetic is the difficulty of storytelling. Due to the horror encountered, the traumatic state determines the storytelling. Its possibility, its mode, and the need for empathy in order to break the imposed silence. Now, this seems relevant, especially for today. The project, therefore, appealed to two ambitions. First, the current situation of the world makes a deeper, more creative and contagious reflection on trauma and its assault on human subjectivity an urgent task for art. The insights the novel harbors with its wild adventures uniquely connect to other experiences of war, violence, and captivity throughout history, strongly relevant for the present. Second, this poses a problem of what we call representation, with suggesting that it is already there, which is not true. I thought that a well-thought-through video project can explore and transgress the limits of what can be seen, shown, narrated, and witnessed, specifically in relation to trauma. For as we well know by now, trauma is itself notoriously unrepresentable. The image thinking is in charge of bridging that unbridgeable gap. In particular, the mode of storytelling is the primary target of the search. Full of incongruous events and repetitive stories, maddening implausibility, lengthy interruptions of the storyline. You recognize what I'm saying about the novel, right? Inserted poems and novellas, and at the same time anchored in a harrowing reality, while also making readers laugh out loud. This happens when I see people reading in the novel, they laugh. Cervantes' novel challenges reading itself. The tension between the two media, both captives of linearity, makes this linearity problem the most illuminating case for image thinking in confrontation with such a novel. As a mostly narrative medium, film seems the least apt to do justice to the turbulent incoherence, repetitiveness, and incongruous adventures told in the novel. Nevertheless, thanks to film's audio-visualization, something must be possible that is more in line with, line is the wrong word here, but with the difficult novel. It seems relevant that Wittgenstein's ending of his Tractatus from 1921, quote, of what one cannot speak, one should keep silent, was modified later in, of what one cannot speak, one can still show. And that's a crucial difference, of course. The importance of showing is to enable witnessing as an engaged activity against the indifference of the world. The theatricality of this display might help to turn onlookers from potential voyeurs into activated, empathetic witnesses. Now, my first imaging intuition when I started this project suggested that in order to do justice to the peculiar, cyclic, perhaps even hysterical form of Cervantes' novel, while pursuing the two goals of showing and for witnessing, only an equally incoherent episodic artwork could be effective. Hence the way this has turned out. So here you have the alternative statement of Wittgenstein in a later, much later discussion with an English philosopher. Now, this artwork then had to exceed a plain similarity of form. Instead, it needs to yield thought images, or denkbeelden, created through image thinking. Thus, the tenuous line of a single narrative yields to an installation that puts the visitors, participants, in the position of making their own narrative out of what is there, on the basis of their own baggage, while witnessing events without chronological linearity. This is adequate to the state of trauma presented or invoked in the pieces and in juxtapositions among them, and to the need to stretch out a hand to, instead of turning away from, people hurt so deeply that they seemed so different we dismiss them as mad. And this is what they say about Don Quixote, he was mad. The disorderly display gives a shape, however unreadable and unclear, to the trauma-induced madness of the novel's form. Now, I don't know if the next slide is the right one. No, it is not. The trauma incurred by Cervantes after being held in captivity as a slave for 5.5 years, without any sense of an ending to his disempowered state and his suffering, has been beautifully traced in the writings narrated and explained by Colombian literary historian Maria Antonia Garces, and I think I have shown her image earlier. So there's a little problem in the PowerPoint. Now, this traumatic state looms over the entire project and determines its form. We can only see a haunting autobiographical spirit in the 3 chapters in the first part called The Captive's Tale. But the shape of the theatrical display does not represent the madness. It hints at it. It makes us reflect on it. Now, the disorderly... I think that there is a problem with the PowerPoint. The disorderly installation embodies that form. And the installation is more orderly in this case here by the circular form that it takes. And we can talk about that later. It is a thought image. And this installation had to answer by means of image thinking to the paradoxical thought image of the shape of formlessness. It's a paradoxical notion, but it works. In the Don Quixote project, the attempt is to present, not represent, trauma. And for this purpose, I've been thinking experimentally, in other words, image thinkingly, how to deal with the contradictory aspects of the trauma and art encounter. And first of all, it is imperative to distinguish between 3 aspects of trauma: its cause, the situation or state that cause produces, and the state of near powerlessness of bystanders, yet the hope of a possibility to help people suffering from it. Don't know if the next one is good. No, not yet. And that distinction can be formulated succinctly as follows. Violence, an event that happens. Trauma, a state that results. And empathy, an attitude that enables. Those are the 3 elements that count here. The subject of these 3 facets are different. The violence has an agent, culprit, perpetrator. The traumatized subject is the victim, and the subject of empathy is the social interlocutor, us all, who can potentially help overcome it. And in the case of this project, this is the visitor who is the primary target of the exhibition, its interlocutor. So that is you all when you see it later. And the interlocutor is the fictional figures brought to life. So this exhibition aims to activate visitors to become such empathetic subjects. Now, how can we approach this challenge as ordinary agents, not professionals of mental health? Difficult. In everyday life, images of violence conducive to trauma are considered informative. We see it on the news every day. We take them in, even get bored by the repetitive nature, not even absorbing what that repetitiveness says about the world. According to the groundbreaking philosophy of language developed by John Austin, it is better to change gears and consider such images not informative, but enhance their performativity. And this can result in a shift from activist art, which persuasively focuses on specific political issues, to activating art rather than activist art. Activating art that seeks to strengthen the performativity of the images. I think I have something about this. No? There is something wrong with the PowerPoint. Maybe I sent the wrong one. Confusions and ethical problems threaten in attempts to show how such horrific acts of violence in our projects, we do not show these acts. A solicitation of feel-good identification, trauma envy, is utterly unhelpful too, even ethically problematic, but always lurks. and so does, as we know from Adorno's caution against it, the risk of voyeurism. One moment where violence occurs in our videos is when a traumatized young man, Cardenio, acts out. But Cervantes' novel intimates that is a consequence of earlier violence. And this is the episode, the failure of listening. I hope, here you see it. Cardenio is violent. The young man Cardenio's attacks on the interlocutors are responses for their failure to allow him to speak without being interrupted. He says, I have a story to tell, but don't interrupt me. But nobody can stand the story without interrupting, and so it always goes wrong. And this interruption then is a kind of violence. And the scene suggests a psychoanalytic violence of the kind that Adorno would categorize as semiotic violence, without using the word semiotic. As we know, since Adorno's famous 1949 indictment of making and enjoying poetry after Auschwitz, what is best called modesty, restraint, discretion, but neither prudishness nor censorship, is crucial for our relationship to images. The philosopher gives the reason for this severe indictment. He refuses to make sense of what doesn't have sense, doesn't make sense. Such sense-making is wrong because it would be honoring violence with semiotic access and to take pleasure, in other words, in making a potentially pornographic use of the suffering of others. That is what Adorno is warning against. His statement has turned the representation of trauma into a moral censorship. And it is against this taboo that French art historian Georges Didier Berman spoke up in his short but very influential little treatise, which is a plea for attention to even the vaguest Auschwitz photographs. And this is what he says: in order to know, you must imagine. And in order to relate to others, we do need to know. And when full knowledge is impossible, we still must try to approximate, encircle, or feel it. That is what it means to imagine. And that is why the imagination is important. And this, in turn, is why art is important, offering the visual imagination something it images. Taking the element image from the word imagination, turning it into an active verb to image that allows a middle voice, and thus bringing it to the viewer, both body and mind, is the material practice through which art matters. Now another, less philosophical, more banal risk is involved. The abundance of representations of traumatogenic events in the electronic media generates a forgetting of their historical and psychological impact. The surplus is produced by and produces consumption. And through their graphic explicitness and their recurrent appearance, these pictures are confined to historical insignificance, even oblivion. As mentioned, our project designs an intervention in that cultural attitude by inflecting activist art into activating art, public-oriented, for a more general change of attitude. The case is made for a community-creating effect of art that helps repairing the broken social bond that has resulted in trauma. And the traumatized person is alone and not even able to remember or fully remember the horror that caused his state of trauma. As a result, they are even alone within themselves. If anything can be done to help such victims exit their paralyzing state of stagnation, it must be through reducing that double loneliness. And this is a social task for which everyone is qualified. You don't need to study psychology to do this. Let's see what happens. Yes. The example of film helps to realize that the reenactment of the traumatogenic experience takes a different form than narrative, drama. And this difference entails a disempowerment of the traumatized. All the narrative manipulation by a director narrator, such as the possibility to expand and compress, summarize, highlight, underscore, or minimize elements of the story as they wish are unavailable to the actor, who is only able to enact a drama that is not, in this case, his to master, even though at some point in the past it happened to him in this case. And this makes dramatic reenactment tragically solitary. And the subject to whom the event happened is deprived of the narrative mastery over it, so that a narrative memory cannot come about, but also of a second person, an interlocutor. A work by a photographer, Ebba Sund, provides us with the image of that. Image thinking seems to think this through. Now, in this case, the figure seems locked up in a dark, grotto-like space, and he is alone within himself. The space is a metaphor of his mind. The near monochromic image presents his loneliness in the combination of the slightly opened lips and the turn of the head to a possible outside, hopefully. His eyes show craving, but at the same time without hope of achieving the desired liberation. The point of light in his eyes and the tip on the nose do suggest there is an opening in the wall on the right side of him. Once we give this image the time images demand, we notice that even the hairs on his chin capture the light. The delicate balance of light and dark, with light behind him as if he is pushed inside the prison, and then suggested light on the side, is a collaborative work. It was staged by cinematographer Jonas Valtersson, who was painstakingly making backwards movements in an impossibly narrow space, while directing the actor, since there was no space for me as the film director to be there too. I was just looking from the outside in. And then it was recreated by Ebba Sund for this still image. 2 authors together then, or rather 3, with the actor included. Now, this has become the poster image in the Swedish premiere of the film. And it's another work by Ebba Sund that I consider a masterpiece of the adequate presentation of trauma that avoids all the pitfalls that have been mentioned so far. And this became the poster image of the exhibition. And when I received it, I could not stop looking at it in wonderment. It is not a representation of the traumatized man, yet there is no doubt that this is an image of trauma. The attempt to imagine in order to know, from Didi Ummerman, can only succeed thanks to the imaging. And it is an image that this is, again, the work of collective authorship. Additionally, the set itself was also a co-author. Like the cave-like narrow space, the prison suggesting iron lattice was just there. It was an element of an old ruined castle, the slot ruin in Kronoberg in Småland, which is where we did a lot of the filming and where we did the premiere. But it is to the image that we must give our time and attention. The cropping suggests a much larger grid with 2 doors entirely consisting of iron bars. This out-of-frame, hors-champ extension augments the effect of enclosure and even affects the separating contraption. But on the right, we can see that the door is already on its way to opening. You see the door a little bit opening there. Or it is being closed. And it is the captive just being captured at this moment or about to be released? This ambiguity is a sign of intermediality, since it intimates movement. There is another ambiguity, the slow transformation in the focus from blurred on the right to sharp on the left, a hesitation between 3 and 2 dimensions. And this situates the image between the environment of the set and the flatness of the photograph. And that effect is enhanced by the perspectival lines that recede forwards to the left. The grid is clearly pictured obliquely. What can be the point or meaning of that? Now, the oblique angle establishes a contrast between the lattice and the face of the captive, his face starkly frontal. That contrast is key to the image as imagination in order to know. Didi Roman again. Whereas in the previous image the captive was tragically alone, here he is more strongly locked up, but not entirely alone within himself. For here he has an incipient interlocutor, us. His mouth is covered by the large lattice. His moustache shows a bit above it, and his beard below it, so that the absence of the mouth is more strongly suggested. He cannot speak. Meaning, he cannot speak, he cannot tell about the horror of slavery, captivity, forced labor that he has had to endure, years on end. For Cervantes, the writer, it was 5.5 years. For the character he created, the captive, the time is not specified, we can only imagine. But then what is the point of that contrast between oblique and straightforwardly frontal? His eyes say it all. He cannot speak because he cannot narrate what happened to him. But the image says he can look at you, look you in the face and implore you to fulfill his desire, life-giving, life-saving, to have an interlocutor, to not be alone. So please look at me, see me, and help me. The eyes look at us imploringly, but also deeply sadly. Now, according to Cervantes' embedded story of the captive, in the end he manages to escape. In the novel, this is thanks to a fairy tale fantasy. The daughter of the slave owner, Zoraida, falls for this gentlemanly captive she considers good enough for her husband. So, in a convoluted story, she helps him escape and escapes with him. And in the exhibition project, we simplified this, avoiding the excessively fantastic narrative, which risked visually distracting from the primary imaging act. Among the reasons for slimming down the scene was the need to leave the traumatized state of the captive intact so that the subtle shift of an incipient restoration of the narrative power over the self could be shown. For as we know from the experts, trauma doesn't simply go away. But narratively, in Ebba Sund's photographs, the next moment we receive an answer to the question, the ambiguity of the previous photograph posed. Was the door open, about to open, or about to close? Well, it seems opened. And this image has an ambiguity similar to the previous one, but in reverse. The perspectival lines go in the opposite direction, from left to right, and this tells us that the previous image was made from the outside, whereas this one was taken from the inside. And now we see the captive moving away from the apparent interlocutors in order to escape and turn his back to us, instead of his eyes to us. Have we failed him, or has our empathy empowered him? Moreover, his body is sharply in focus, whereas the letters is blurry. And this indicates that now the one who is striving to become master of this story is running away. And the ones busy capturing the view are locked inside the prison. The captive is running to his freedom, indicated by the straight line of the forest on the other side of the lake. And that lake might be the obstacle, the expanse of water that makes access to the other side of freedom still a way off, an allusion to the sea in the novel. But his clutched fist and the determined body pose indicate that he will not give up. He is already outside, which the lake and the forest signify, opposed as they are to the bars of the prison. Sund's play, Ebba Sund, the photographer, her play with perspective, with the ambiguity between 2 and 3 dimensionality, resonates perfectly with the previous image. The ostentatious frontality of the face, half hidden as it is, in that poster figure of the earlier one where he is behind the bars, resonates with the straight line in the distance in this one. In the other one, the frontality was close to the picture plane. Here, it is in the far distance. There, his eyes were tools to solicit empathy. Here, they are invisible, since he has turned his back to us, and we can trust they are sharply focusing on that other side of freedom. However, the sense that we, the spectators, are now locked up makes for a form of identification, not with the man himself, but with the position into which he was locked. This, again, is created by means of subtle contrasts. The blurred lattice separates us from the sharply focused ex-captive, as the darkness of the black iron contrasts with the fresh green grass outside. Now we go to the ending. You will be relieved. We don't know enough about the widespread occurrence of slavery today. And not only knowledge can make true abolition of this most horrific crime against humanity possible, but knowledge is not only academic, it is also imaginative. We must know, understand, and empathically feel what it is like to be enslaved. Image it, imagine it, and then image it. This is an integrated knowledge which is indispensable to end slavery. And according to one of the most accessible sources, the Global Slavery Index that I consulted in 2016, 40.3 million people live in slavery now. Of these, 71% are female and 29% are male. The numbers are staggering. While each individual life thus destroyed counts. Deploying the iconic work of cultural heritage, Don Quixote, and a contemporary art form, video installation, we hoped that being touched by the installation's form, viewers can learn from it, from dealing with their own experiences of violence contemporary society can generate, as well as those hinted at by others, in order to repair what Cervantes called the broken thread of memory. And we can add social connectivity. Art is best placed to activate audiences for this purpose. It does not report on knowledge, but it produces it. It doesn't reproduce it, it produces it through that indispensable tool of the imagination. So I hope the exhibition that you have perhaps already seen or that you're going to see will inspire you all to be active participants in this dealing with sadness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this really multidisciplinary view. And now I would like to open discussion. If we have questions, please introduce yourself, and the time is for us.
You're all welcome to ask questions, and if not now, you can do it after we open
Please,
the exhibition.
Have first question.
There is a question.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. From Helsinki. Does it work?
It works.
Yes, it works.
It works. Okay. Yes. Thank you so much. So, if I understood it correctly, this idea of thinking in images is like how much information or human thinking we can gather from looking at the pictures. So, it is a kind of tool of empathy, towards the image that we do. And actually, my question is it started in my mind a process that is it a matter of empathy or code reading, or maybe it's everything all at once, but empathy seems to be a very significant factor in how much we are able to kind of gather from the pictures?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't have a one-line answer to it, because what we tried to do was make these episodes trigger that empathy and make you feel like, oh no, oh how horrible, and what is it that I'm seeing, and what can I do? And that set of questions is what we hope that the installation will inspire you. And so there is not a single answer to it. It's not about knowledge. What we see in the installation is not something we must know. It's something we must feel, must affectively connect to, so that we can be empathetic to the people who suffer from these things. And we know we have now a war in the north and a war in the south, and people are dying every day, and we must have, I think we cannot help having a response to that is on the level of affective, sort of, what has been called heteropathic identification. You identify not out of yourself, but you identify with others. And you don't become the others, but you relate to them. And I think that is the whole point of the installation, and I hope you will go and watch it and sit there. Please sit, take a chair and sit and look for a long time at what you see, and then you will understand that this is not about knowledge, it's about being with these people. And that being with, that's the empathy that we need. And that is what is mostly lacking in the world, because we run to the next business and we have things to do and we have no time for all this stuff. So please go to the show and take your time with it. And then you will feel what happens to you in relation to what you see. It's the only answer I can come up with.
Thank you. I have a question regarding this very aspect. I was thinking when you were speaking that the artwork is activating and should be activating things in people. I was thinking, and you also mentioned that it's very contemporary and in modern times, and I was wondering about other modern concepts regarding those artworks that can inflict feelings in us. I was thinking about the category of trigger warning. What do you think about this category? Because it's definitely something that warns us about the content. Do you use it? Do you think it's a valuable thing?
Mm-hmm.
Because in a way it protects people, some people, but in other way it generally, I guess, kind of warns everyone that something.
Right. Yeah. That's why I invoked Adorno and his warning about poetry after Auschwitz. But I found it very interesting that he first says no, and then he says yes, but show it. And the show is the triggering. I think that's what happens, is when you see it. You know, the thing is, looking must lead to seeing, but it doesn't automatically do that. You can just look and say, oh, okay. But if you are intensively visually engaged with what you see, you are triggered to empathy. And I think that is the whole point of making art activating, so that people actually, I'm not saying that they should, well, I would say that if I could, vote differently, but it's not about that. It is about having a sense that you're with those people. And that is what is being triggered when you see things that do, like you see this couple here in the middle who are being married. How happy they look, right? And this is a case where you can say, okay, marriage is maybe not the only way to happiness, but the image triggers something. It triggers a realization that these people are deeply unhappy and not happy. And so the happiest day of their life becomes the unhappiest day of their life. And that is what the image triggers. And so what we try to do in this project, and of course it's very difficult to do that, and we were very few and very underpaid actors, and but the possibility of making imaging situations where you can feel more than just see what happens to people when they are in this traumatic situation is what is I think the point of art, or the art of sadness, or as I call this lecture. Art of sadness is the art where sadness becomes the primary trigger to come out of yourself and your self-satisfied life and to look at others and try to do something. And I think that is, I don't know if I answer your question, but that's more or less my sense of triggering.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering if imagining could be understood as a kind of medium for intersubjectivity about what is unspeakable, for us reaching something that we do not need to communicate, we never need to be explicit about, but to effectively feel. That is this kind of, could it be interpreted in this way? This was my first question. And the other is kind of a, fringe thinking. So have you maybe tried or thought of making such imaging and imagining process for a concept that is easily communicable, and seeing how this works? Because trauma, as you said, is something that cannot be expressed.
No.
And so I understand that this intersubjectivity could go for me as, for instance, a traumatized person to understand and feel more, secure about myself, and also for the interlocutor. But have you ever thought of doing the same for concepts that are like solid linguistically and explicit? And would this work, do you think?
Well,
I've gone too far.
It's a good question and a difficult one. Of course, the impossibility to represent trauma doesn't mean that we have to close our eyes for it. And this is why we make this work, where you can see that things happen that must be traumatizing, and that you can convey. The image can convey that. So imagination and imaging are the tools to give access to inaccessible states of mind. But it's actually in Cervantes' novel, but also, of course, in Freud and in other psychological theories, that the impossibility of being with a person who is inaccessible must be broken, but the person cannot do it because the trauma makes that impossible. So we have to do it for them. And that is what then becomes the possibility of empathy that can help the traumatized person to reweave the broken thread of the memory and remember, oh yeah, this happened. And but now you ask if I've tried this with like positive situations, for example. I'm not so into positive situation representations, but I have made a film on René Descartes, the philosopher, who was not a happy man at all, but he was able to deal with his handicapped situation, psychological situation. He's abandoned by his mother who died and his father who left, and he was able to do something with it that led to new insights. And the sort of the despicable contempt for Descartes as hyper-rationalist. He was this hyper-rationalist. No, he was not. He was mad as a hatter. And he was able to deal with that. And so, in that sense, it would be a positive example of the way you can overcome these situations. I don't know if I answered that enough, but... Yes?
Small comments still. Maybe this is an issue of how to maintain compassion. For example, in the case of Auschwitz and many other instances when we have many times seen and heard about these stories, how they kind of stay relevant in this information overload.
Yeah, no, that's a real problem. But, you know, the word compassion means suffering with. Like sympathy is the same word in another language. And that suffering with means that you are willing and able to be with that person who is suffering and feel that same grief, that same misery, that same pain that the person must have been through. So I think that is maintaining compassion is a vocation that we should all have compassion with people, because it means that people suffer. We know that lots of people do, but then you suffer with that person, and that makes it a little more bearable to suffer with someone. You're not alone, and that's why I showed the image of Don Quixote in that grotto where he was completely isolated, and that isolation is the absence of the compassionate other. And so in that sense, I try to make images that show that possibility, that encourage that possibility of compassion. I'm glad you bring up that word, because it's an important word. And it is the synonym of sympathy. Sympathy, suffering with. Compassion, suffering with. And that is what people need. And that is what we don't give enough, because we don't know these people, and they think, oh, they're mad, you know. You see a traumatized person doing crazy things, and you walk another street because you don't want to be there. And that is the absolute refusal, the rejection of the need for compassion. So, yeah, it is important to make that an issue.
Professor Bal, thank you for your lecture. Michał Jędrzejski, Institute of Art Studies, School. 2 questions. The first one, what is your personal motivation for your interest in sadness in art? And the second one, can you see any effect of your art and texts on people who suffer, whom you might know?
Oh, 2 difficult ones. 2 very difficult questions, but both very relevant. I don't know. Of course, I'm just publishing this summer a book where every chapter starts with a personal memory from childhood, from adolescence, where I have gone through difficult situations, and then what did I do later with that memory? Intellectually with my work, so it became a sort of a source for my thinking, and that is, I think, an important possibility that you have. We all have sad memories. I cannot imagine anyone having only cheerful memories, but maybe it happens. But the sad memories, the difficult memories, the need for asking for compassion and not getting it. Because the parents are too strict, or, you know. So that is a difficult situation. Now, the second question, what was the second question? If I know of effects? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I cannot cite instant cases where that happened. I'm just having to trust that it is possible for people to be impacted by this attitude that I promote with the work. I cannot say that I know someone who has been cured from trauma because of my work. That would be an arrogance that I don't pursue. But I think it is important to just hope that this happens. And I have to say that of the many PhDs that I have accompanied in their trajectory to the doctorate, there have been some cases where I think something has happened that was that sort of crucial turning into something more livable. And I could tell a story, but that would be too personal to tell it. But there was a case where it was very important that way of thinking was there, and so the suffering person was able to deal with that because of the understanding. And so in that sense, if that's what you mean, then it has happened. But I'm not going to cite names and, and incidences, but there have been quite strong cases, a few.
If we have one last question.
Yes, a short one.
Running out of time.
Oh, yes.
Mamy tutaj pytanie. Tutaj z przodu pani, w 4. czy 5. rzędzie.
Yeah,
Thank you for this privileged last position. If I may ask about your working process, because as I imagine you started with the concept, imaging, imagination, gathering knowledge, producing knowledge, and producing affect and action. What was your process of selection? How did you come up with Don Quixote as this particular one? Because, of course, one can probably think of other candidates. So what made you select this particular figure, except, of course, for the fact that this is a literary classic, so we assumed as well.
Yeah.
People know it, but I guess you probably had other reasons to
No,
choose
absolutely,
this particular one.
yeah. Well, one very banal but important aspect in the selection is that the actor is the spitting image of the image we have of the never-existing Don Quixote. He never existed, but we have an image of him through the paintings and the drawings. And this guy, when he was 12 years old, and told his parents that he wanted to become an actor, and his uncle was there and said, then you have to play Don Quixote. Okay. And so then 40 years later, he comes to me and he says, can we do a Don Quixote? Why? And then he tells me this story, and I think, well, it makes sense, but let me reread the novel, and I did, and then I realized, only then did I realize how crazy the novel is and how incoherent. And so I said, we can do a Don Quixote, but not as a film. Impossible. But of course, I've had other instances. I've done a Madame B, and my name is Bal, so I'm Madame B, and we are all a little bit that. But I've done on the basis of, or in response to, Flaubert's masterpiece, a film and an installation work where issues became burning, including sad issues and frustrations, but also other ones. It wasn't exactly the same kind of thing that we saw in Don Quixote. But the reason that I chose these masterpieces for cultural heritage is because of my thinking about time and my resistance against chronology and linearity, and my desire to make the past part of the present. And this is also, if I can just add this, having worked with a lot of PhD candidates, my wish was to help them to become the future of the kind of thinking that I thought is important. Not my thinking, but the kind of thinking that is important for society. And this is why PhDs are the future, and that for me is very important. So I also select sometimes issues because of that, the intertemporality, the past in the present towards the future.
We shall continue the following days, because this is not an afternoon or evening with Professor Mieke Bal, but this is the whole week with Professor Mieke Bal, so you all feel invited to other events.
I think that once again, applause for our guest. Ladies and gentlemen, we are finishing now, but let me give you one or maybe two reflections which I had. The first one, during the discussion, I had a thought that we, people who create art, we all know that art heals, that it has the strongness, that it can heal. I'm not sure if we look forward, if it heals society, but I'm quite sure that we look forward that it heals us who create it. And it's very important, in my opinion. And the second reflection about image thinking, I reminded Professor Mondzik, who died a few weeks ago. He was a really important participant of our university community, a great performer, artist, and person also with this point of view that the image is important and it can take you in very different places of your mind. Dear friends, let me also give a few informations. The first one, I think important, if you would like to jump deeper into these problems, we are in the final stretch of printing publication of Professor Bal with commentary given by Dr. Elżbieta Błotnicka-Mazur, translated by Dr. Jerzy Skwarzyński. Many thanks to you. He is also here. And edited by Professor Małgorzata Gamrat. I think that in maybe a few days, maybe a few weeks, we can get it. And the second information is about opening that will take part in the Galeria Labirynt. It's quite close to Kul at 7 p.m. The important information is that tonight exhibition is free. So if you want, the admission is free. So if you want to spend some time with us to discuss with Professor Mieke those questions or maybe different ones, we can do it. We have half an hour, yes, to get there and to spend more time together. Thank you very much for this evening. Thank you for our authorities of university, of faculty, and all of you guests for the time here. And once again, great thanks for you, Mieke, for this time here in Lublin. And I hope that it is nice beginning of this adventure. Thank you.
Thank you. And when you're there tonight with the opening, after the opening and looking at the images, feel completely at ease to address me, to ask questions, to even criticize and say, this is wrong. You can do that.